All right, let's get straight to it. Today, we're putting on our value investor hats and taking a hard look at India's solar sector. This is one of the most talked about spaces right now, but we're not here for the hype. We're here to apply a serious, disciplined framework to figure out if there's real value or just a trap. It's a high-stakes game, so let's dive right in.
You know, this quote right here, it just nails the entire situation. On one side, you've got what looks like a generational, once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. But on the other, you've got these massive, terrifying commodity risks that could wipe you out. It's the classic boomer-bust setup. So our entire goal today is to build a framework, a system that lets us see through the noise and navigate this thing without getting burned.
Okay, here's how we're going to break this down. First, the solar gold rush, why everyone's so excited. Then we'll slice up the value chain to see where the money's really made. We'll look at the government's role, what I'm calling the golden handcuffs, and the ticking time bomb of oversupply. And then the most important part, our multi-bagger litmus test to find the winners before we talk about how to invest in the endgame.
All right, Section 1, the solar gold rush. Let's start with the big picture, the massive tailwinds that are making this sector impossible to ignore.
So, what's the #1 reason for this gold rush? It's not about being green, not really. It's all about this number, 85%. That's how much the cost of solar energy has plummeted in India since just 2014. I mean, that's a staggering drop, and it completely rewrites the rules of the energy game.
And here's what that cost drop actually looks like on the ground. You can see it right here. Solar is now, without a doubt, the cheapest new power source you can build in India. Cheaper than wind, and way, way cheaper than coal. Look, when you're the low-cost provider, you win. It's that simple. This isn't a maybe. It's a fundamental economic reality, and it's the foundation of everything we're talking about today.
But it's not just about cheap electricity.
Oh no.
This is backed by the full weight of India's national strategy. Think about it. They're on track to be the world's third largest economy. They desperately need to cut their reliance on imported oil. We're talking 88% dependency right now. And their energy needs are set to literally double by 2040. So hitting that massive 500 gigawatt renewable target, it's not a nice to have. It's an absolute strategic necessity.
And these aren't just vague ambitions. The numbers are just wild. We've seen 25% compound growth for years, and that's projected to continue. But look at this. Installed capacity is expected to jump from 82 gigawatts to nearly 200 in just the next 4 years. That's more than double, a 141% increase. You just don't see growth like that in major industries. The tailwind here is more like a hurricane.
Okay, so the big picture is amazing. But you know the saying, a rising tide lifts all boats? Well, in investing, that's a dangerous assumption. So for Section 2, we need to get our scalpels out and dissect this value chain. We have to figure out where the value is actually being created, and just as importantly, where it's being completely destroyed.
So how do you go from basically sand to electricity? It's a 5-step dance. You start with this super pure stuff called polysilicon. That gets sliced into wafers. The wafers are then turned into the magic component, solar cells. You bundle those cells together into modules. That's the solar panel you'd see on a roof. And finally, you have the guys who install it all, the EPC and power generation folks.
Now this is where it gets really, really interesting. Look at the difference in profits across these steps. Down at the end of the chain, making the modules or installing them, the competition is brutal, and the margins are razor thin, sometimes even negative. But then you look at solar cells, and bam, 40 to 50% EBITDA margins. It's not even close. That is the glaringly obvious sweet spot where all the money is being made right now. Okay, stop. If you remember one thing from this entire analysis, make it this. Those insane 40 to 50% margins, they are not real. Let me say that again. They are not the result of a free market. They don't exist because of some brilliant technology or amazing business model. They are a complete and total creation of government policy, an artificial bubble. And that fact right there is the heart of both the incredible opportunity and the terrifying risk we're staring at.
So that leads us right into Section 3, what I'm calling the government's golden handcuffs. Let's break down exactly how policy is creating this market and also trapping it.
The government's playbook here has 4 key moves. You've got the PLI scheme, which is basically cash incentives to build factories. You have the ALMM and BCD, which are essentially walls designed to keep cheap Chinese imports out. It's a classic protectionist strategy. But the real linchpin, the one that makes it all work, is something called the Domestic Content Requirement, or DCR. And this is the DCR in action. It's pretty simple. If a solar project has government backing, it has to use cells made in India. Period. This creates this little protected sandbox. And inside that sandbox, Indian companies can sell their cells for 16 cents a watt. Meanwhile, outside, the globally competitive price from China is 4 cents. That is a 4 times price difference. That gap is not profit, it's a subsidy. And it's the only reason those huge margins exist. But you can't create an artificial market like this without consequences. And that brings us to the scary part, Section 4, the ticking time bomb that's been set. We're talking about a huge, inevitable supply glut.
The math here is just brutally simple. All these government incentives are causing a mad dash to build factories. By 2028, we're looking at 100 to 120 gigawatts of manufacturing capacity. But even with all that amazing growth we talked about, India itself will only need about 60 gigawatts. So you do the math. That leaves a 40 to 60 gigawatts surplus, a mountain of solar panels with no homes, and all that capacity has to find a buyer somewhere.
And that somewhere, of course, is exports. The entire survival plan for this industry is now banking on being able to ship this massive oversupply overseas, mostly to the US. So think about what that means. The investment thesis has completely changed. This isn't a simple domestic growth story anymore. It's now a massive, high-stakes gamble on geopolitics and international trade.
And if you want to see what this looks like when it goes wrong, you just have to look at China. Jinko Solar, once a world leader, stock down 75%. Why? Global oversupply and collapsing margins.
And it gets worse. Longi Solar, another absolute giant in the space, an 80% wipeout from its peak. Same story. This is what happens when the music stops in a commodity industry. Even the titans get absolutely crushed, and there is no reason to think Indian companies are immune to this.
So this all sounds pretty terrifying, right? A minefield. So how on earth do we navigate it? Well, this is the most critical part of our work today. Section 5, the multi-bagger litmus test. This is our rigorous, disciplined, 5-step framework for sorting the true long-term winners from the companies that are destined to become value traps.
Here they are, the 5 pillars of survival and success. 1. Vertical integration. 2. Financial strength. 3. A real technological edge. 4. Sheer scale and market leadership. And 5. What I call policy and geopolitical alignment. And let me be clear, this is not a buffet where you can pick and choose. A potential winner has to score high across the board. Being good at 1 or 2 of these just won't cut it.
First up, vertical integration. Look, if a company is just buying cells and slapping them together into a module, that's a low-quality commodity business. They get a 1 or a 2. The real defensive moat, the real value, is created when a company controls its own destiny by going upstream, making its own cells, its own wafers, maybe even its own polysilicon. A company that goes all the way from polysilicon to module isn't just a company anymore. It becomes a strategic national asset, and that's the ultimate protection.
Next up, technology. This one is brutal. Solar technology moves at lightning speed. Today's standard tech, called monoPERC, is fine for now. But if a company is making that and doesn't have a clear, well-funded plan to get to the next generation, things like TOPCon or HJT, they are a dead man walking. Their factories will be obsolete in a few years. In this sector, falling behind on tech isn't a problem, it's a death sentence. Okay, test number 2, financial strength. For a value investor, this is everything. This is a business that eats cash for breakfast. Building these giant factories is insanely expensive. So we need to see a fortress balance sheet. That means things like an interest coverage ratio over 10 times. They can easily pay their debts. Low debt to EBITDA, under 2. And critically, they need to be able to fund their own growth from their cash flow, not by constantly running to the market for more money.
So here's the hard rule.
our pass-fail grade. To even make it onto our watch list, a company has to score a 4 out of 5 or better on at least 4 of our 5 tests. No exceptions. Anything less than that, we're not interested. It's just too risky. This kind of strict discipline is the only thing that separates true investing from pure speculation in a sector like this.
All right, last section. Let's talk about the end game. We've got our framework, so how do we actually invest? How do we manage the risks? And what happens when the government, inevitably, takes the training wheels off this industry?
So this is how we see the future playing out. The next year or two will probably be the good old days, a protected boom. But then, starting around 2027, that oversupply bomb starts to go off. That's when you'll see margins get absolutely crushed. And then by 2030 or so, we have to assume the game changes completely. The government protection fades away, and these companies are thrown into the deep end of a hyper-competitive global market. Only the strongest will survive.
Because this is such a risky space, we have to know when to get out. These are our tripwires, our exit triggers. The second you see signs that government protection is fading, or their order book is actually shrinking, or they're falling behind on tech, or the balance sheet starts to look shaky, that is your signal to get out. You can't just hope things will get better. Hope is not an investment strategy.
So let's wrap this up with a final, sober warning. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. The Indian solar sector is, at best, a medium probability, high-risk opportunity. The upside for the few companies that win will be astronomical, but for the rest, they will go to zero. This is a space that demands you do your homework, that you have a 5 to 10 year time frame, and that you have the guts and the discipline to stick to a framework like the one we've discussed. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.